Go.
There
we go. I think they're away and racing now, Councillor Hopkins.
Okay. Well, just what do you want done with minor ones? Do you want them conveyed to you or to what? Right.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or feedback from the minutes? If none, then I could please have somebody move for them to be accepted. Councillor Ryan, seconded. Councillor Hopkins, thank you very much. We'll now move into item 4.1, which is a consideration of the climate change projections and climate change risk framework. And I'd like to invite Mr. Cook or Mr. Campbell to speak to that, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have come here to seek the approval from the Park Committee to recommend that Council adopts the climate change projections. We've done a lot of work on this. We've had a lot of discussion. We've polished up the document. And if you want to save time, then I suggest you approve it.
Thank you. So I open the floor up for any comments or questions. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. I certainly feel that this has to go to council to be adopted. I would like to see us moderate some of the declarations and statements in here a little. I noticed that at the very start, the summary says that various significant risks will happen, and I believe it should be more conditional. I think it should say council recognises that climate change may bring significant future risks. When anything to do with the future, as persons as far apart as Nostradamus and Plato have demonstrated, cannot be asserted with absolute confidence. Equally, on page 4 of the document, I just think if we said things like the purpose of the document is not to evaluate the impact of risks and how to respond to them, but rather to acknowledge what the physical risks may be rather than are. There's a few, in the next page, there's a reference to iwi in the business sector recognise that a changing climate will present risks. And again, I would argue that maybe if we said may. I'm also curious, I'm just trying to find the page, I think page 9. I'm just wondering when the country officially changed its name. It's a small point, but a not inconsiderable one. But I mean, generally speaking, I'd be perfectly happy to move the recommendations. But I would like to see some of the kind of predictions of absolute doom soften slightly. Because I think they should, I genuinely believe they should be a little more conditional.
Mr. Cook, Mr. Campbell.
Yes, I think that's probably not a problem given it's talking about future scenarios. The reference to Aotearoa New Zealand on page 9 is in terms of the title of the document, so we can't change that title that the ministry put on it. Yeah, so it's just the generic title I've used.
Councillor McKeown.
Yeah, you know, your projections out to 2090, well, no one knows what that's going to be, the assumptions, but all I would say is that with our climate change prediction, yes, the climate might be changing, but in my lifetime of living here for some 60 odd years, I've seen snowfalls, I've seen 120 days of 30-degree heat, I've seen floods and everything else. So more or less what Jim's trying to say is the wording can be changed a bit. It's not dramatic, it's just practicality, and the human population has certainly upset the climate, but is it because of where it's built or what it's done, the amount of roading that's done, the drainage that's been put in, the irrigation system that are gone? It's not entirely strictly from the climate, it's actually human population as well.
Thank you. I think we'd all acknowledge that humans have had a significant influence on the climate that we're currently observing and will continue to do so into the future.
I do have one other question, if I may, either to Roger or David or Amanda, sorry, Amanda. There are various precipitation and other figures, flooding and all manner of other matters that are raised, and all the calculations are based on applying RCP 8.5. Now, I know that's one of the three, I think, or four possible future scenarios mooted by the IPCC. I'm also aware that apparently before the Cairo Convention last year, the IPCC stepped back from relying on RCP 8.5 and suggested instead, or proposed instead, that the future prediction be predicated on a lower RCP number. Now, my understanding is that that hasn't as yet been ratified by the New Zealand government, but I do wonder whether this strategy shouldn't perhaps indicate that, even with an asterisk and a footnote saying that RCP 8.5 is currently being reviewed or under reconsideration or something of the sort. I don't want to relitigate all the calculations, but I do think it might be appropriate to acknowledge that it may no longer be treated as a definitive benchmark. Do you have a view on that? That's sorry, it meant to be a question.
Sorry, if I may, I guess the purpose of the recommendation that we're looking at today is not delving into all of the detail of whether it's RCP 8.5 or whether it's something else. And I think there's a whole lot of people who are a whole lot smarter than us who would debate the pros and cons of that to a large degree. Whatever happens, none of us will be right. It will be different to where it is now. So I think the focus of this paper is for us to recognise that there are that we are going to have to respond to a changing climate that we're operating in, and it's going to have an impact on both our infrastructure and our health and well-being. And this paper is recommending a specific framework that we use to address those issues, or to look at the risks and to categorise them on the way through, accepting that RCP 8.5 may or may not be correct. Mr. Cook.
Well, even if we acknowledge that RCP 8.5 was the most was at the highest level of the predicted calculations that IPCC have based their formulas on, and which the New Zealand government has, I'd be perfectly comfortable if we simply acknowledge that there were a number of frameworks. This is one of them. It is the most significant, but these are the impacts that would occur if the RCP 8.5 did come to pass.
So we could remedy that with a simple asterisk. Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Yes, we can remedy that with an asterisk and a footnote, but for RCP 4.5 is referenced through the detail of the document, so the projections are given for both 8.5 and 4.5.
Thank you. Councillor Blackler.
Yeah, so that's what my questions were around. Has RCP 4.5 been applied where because there hasn't been a direct comparison made in all instances? So is it just where the information has been available under a 4.5 scenario? And I'll ask another question after you answer that.
Yeah, as explained previously, we've used the information available from verified sources, desktop surveys, Tonkin and Taylor reports that were conducted for the regional authorities, and the NIWA projections.
Thank you. And I guess to summarise what we're trying to do here, we're planning for the worst, hoping for the best kind of scenario, isn't it? So yeah, I agree with Councillor Hopkins' point about how it needs to be acknowledged, but I don't necessarily disagree with it. The assumptions made being put around RCP 8.5. Page 16, last paragraph, river systems within Waitaki are projected to have up to 50% decrease in flows by 2090. I'm wanting to understand, is that in a modified context or a natural? Obviously, if it was the natural systems, there should in theory still be some sort of buffer with the hydro dam setting, but we would expect to see more fluctuations in
in the dam levels themselves, but I'm just wondering if it's downstream of the dams or upstream.
Thank you, councillor Blackler. Just going back to the first issue too, as part of any risk assessment, as information gets refined or updated, we can go back and reapply that, particularly to that 2019 scenario, because that's probably where the main difference would be in the difference between 4.5 and 8.5. So it will still probably show an increase, for example, in temperature, but the range might not be extreme or as great. So as we progress through the risk assessment and then maybe in 5 or 10 years review this, if new information comes to light to say it's a lesser risk on that longer term, we can certainly go back and say, well, by 2090, it's likely to be a bit less, potentially, or more, depending on where it goes. And in the short term, it's probably less variable in that sense. So when you get longer term, it tends to blow out those numbers a bit more. Going back to the river scenario, what the information is telling us is that with the greater extremes in both rainfall and dry events, river flows can experience a lot more sort of peaks in terms of flooding, but the gap between that will be exacerbated. So with dry conditions, particularly on our less hydro controlled rivers, there could be quite a decrease in that sort of mean flow. But when we get a flood, it could be greater. So it's kind of an unusual scenario where we see the big differences there. And they've noticed that in Italy and the flooding they've had there just after a big drought period. So it's being played out across the world in terms of those effects already now, in terms of that difference. The hydro system, probably a little bit more buffered from that, but again, with greater fluctuations, particularly in their winter and spring time, we can see potential changes in terms of storage not being as great as it was with snow, etc.
So supplementary to that, would we foresee that would place pressure on delivery of services for our land users around irrigation in direct competition with power generation, given our move as a nation to electrify? Is there risks there?
Yeah, I guess systems that might be run of river would be more vulnerable to that scenario. We're already seeing quite a move towards irrigation storage on farm for less certain sort of irrigation infrastructure, but the hydro, where it's got the storage buffer, is a bit more immune to that, but where it's run of river, e.g. Clutha, probably a bit different for those scenarios.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that really is the next phase of this piece of work, which is why we need these projections recommended to council for approval, so we can start that piece of work both internally and with stakeholders as to what it potentially means. And that informs the very large piece of work that comes after this, and embedding that into things like our long-term plan structure, future policies that we need throughout the organisation now need to consider climate change projections.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Just to clarify that, Roger, so there'll be an overlay between infrastructure needs and the climate change results of those needs?
Yeah, in future infrastructure decisions, long-term plan preparation, the local authorities are now required to consider the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. So based on some of those minor amendments and the inclusion of the asterisks, can I please ask for somebody to move that the council ops, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Ryan. Thank you. So all those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Thank you both. We'll now move on to item 5.1, and that is the financial report, third quarter financial year report, treasury report. So I'll ask Miss Nichols if she would like to speak to that, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, man. Right.
So you probably heard similar sort of story as this. This is the report for the last 9 months, and we're facing increasing cost pressures. The operating deficit was 6.493 compared with the budget deficit of 3.28 for the 9-month period to 31 December. If you look on over a couple of pages, the projected operating result has been expanded a bit more. There's a few more bullet points to explain how our result is expected to look at 30 June. And the supporting attachment, the quarterly financial reports, there's a bit of added detail for point number 7, the other expenses as well. So you can see all the overs and unders for contractor costs.
Thank you. So I'll now open up the floor for any questions or discussion. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I know I've asked a question before. Although I have 2 questions. One of them you may be able to answer quite simply, and that is I'm trying to make sense. To quote Winnie the Pooh, I think I'm a bear of little brain, but at the very bottom of page 43, there's a reference to staff savings have contributed to a saving on personnel costs. But these vacancies, coupled with the deferral of significant projects, have resulted in reduced levels of recovery from capital projects. Consequently, personnel costs are now reported over budget, a situation which will worsen. So what I can't figure is we don't have people we should have, so we're not paying them salaries that we would have paid them if they were on the payroll. But because they're not here, they actually add to the deficit. I mean, it doesn't make it to a bear of little brain. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
That is a very good question, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Hope or Ms. Nichols to answer.
Yeah, I'll take that particular hospital pass. It's perhaps poorly worded. Yes, because you're exactly right. If there are not staff there, then how are they not charged into a project and then it actually costing us more? It's actually the mix of staff that probably should have been highlighted. So essentially the mix of staff time going into projects has actually, it's almost, they've had to be diverted in some cases into delivering business as usual rather than projects. So business as usual is usually primarily funded by way of rates, whereas projects are funded from loans and other sources of income. Because we're focused on delivering business as usual rather than some of the projects themselves, that change in mix of where time and cost is being allocated is actually creating a variance where overall we've spent less on sort of total remuneration, or actually less of a recovery of that total from projects and more of it sitting in the business as usual area. And there is also a multiplier effect on some of those project costs, so which is offsetting the total rent. So hopefully that's an explanation of a bit of an accounting, really a reasonably complicated accounting process.
Thank you. My other question, and I know I've asked it before, but we've been told today that we've got big blowouts in contractor costs over budget by 427, including the extra costs of 3 million plus for the emergency works. But that's still 1.4, and there's various breakdowns later on showing how roading is over. Roading is under, but others are over budget. If the cost of things is so significantly distorted as it appears to be, do we not have a mechanism that says, right, let's pull this back? I mean, the idea of just saying, okay, contractors' costs have gone up 20%, so that produces a blowout. Surely somebody can put the handbrake on and trim the project, or defer it, stagger it, stage it. I mean, it just seems that, costs have gone up, hence the deficit's worse. How do we manage this?
You know, take this one. The contractor escalations that we're talking about are primarily on the maintenance contracts that we have in place. So we budgeted for what we thought would be. So all of these contracts have a cost escalator built to them. So there's an annual review, and that's based on an indices. It's not CPI, so it's generally something that's higher because it has a far higher fuel component in it. So we budgeted for sort of 2 or 3% increase in these contracts. The reality is that some of those have been between 8 and 12% in terms of escalation of the maintenance contracts. So yeah, if it was just a physical works contract and a specific project, we could dial back the work. But this is delivering the day-to-day stuff. And yeah, we have to take that cost increase on the chin. And we are looking for ways to mitigate that cost, but without, really dramatically changing some services. It gets down to, well, we still need to empty rubbish bins and clean toilets and cut grass and all of those activities that we have indicated to the public we will undertake, and we maintain those service levels. And yeah, we just need to deal with that cost, and we are trying to mitigate it as far as possible, but that is not always possible.
Councillor McKay.
Yeah, the first part of the question I was going to ask, Jim's already done that, but the second part is that money related to emergency works, is that recoverable?
Council has made the decision. So we recovered a pretty significant portion from Okakatahi, and then the balance, we're actually going to fund that from the emergency fund. So council made that decision about a month ago to confirm that that's where the funding would come from. But that is because it's coming from a reserve rather than from operating revenue. That will show as a sort of an unfunded deficit in terms of the operating result that we report at the end of the year. But it has been funded, but from the emergency reserve.
So it's a paper transaction as such.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's the reserve is money we've essentially set aside for this kind of situation, and now we're using some of that.
Thank you. Any additional questions? No, if not, then could I please ask for somebody to move that we accept the report's recommendations? Mayor Kircher, seconder. Councillor Hopkins, thank you very much. And on that note, we've ended 5.1. Sorry, can I put that to the meeting for approval? All those in favour, please say aye.
No.
Against? Thank you, that's carried. Now I'm going to seek counsel as to where we move to next, because I understood we were going to adjourn the PAR prior to it going into public excluded and return to the council meeting. Is that correct?
Oh, sorry, forgive me. I did have one additional question on the Treasury report, if I may. On page 53, talking about other investments in CCOs. At the bottom of the page, it says Whitestone Contracting Limited has paid council a dividend of 225,531, which is less than the amount budgeted for 22-23 of 350,000 in financial returns. The dividend reflects the fact that although, so that's a year out of date. Is that right, Paul? I mean, presumably there'll be another dividend this year.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. So we have moved, we have seconded, and we have passed the motion.
Yes.
So now again, back to you, Ms. Hooper. Where are we going to now?
You are going to adjourn this meeting. And you are. You, Mr. Chair, yes, we're going to adjourn this meeting, and then we are going to change live streams. It'll take 5 minutes for the production team to re-queue, and we're going to resume the council meeting public session where we left it off, and then we'll come back to public excluded in PAR and council after we have no more live streams to worry about.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. So on that basis,
Chair, can I move that we go into public exclusion now, then we don't start the meeting in public? All that motion.
sure. So do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Mayor Kircher. And on that basis, we will now adjourn the PAR.